This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Hing.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to HR and Career with AldeenST. Aldeen is a passionate human resource professional and career coach on a mission to explore and find best practices in HR and career development. Join AldeenST and her guests to explore the complexities of human resources and career development. This is HR and Career with AldeenST.
Welcome to HR and Career. I'm your host, AldeenST. I'm really excited about our episode today. I am joined by career coach Kyle Elliott. Say hi to our guest, Kyle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me as well. I'm excited to be chatting with you today.
I'm really excited to have you on as well. And for those of our listeners who don't know who Kyle is, all you need to do is go on to LinkedIn and look up Kyle Elliott, the Caffeinated career coach. He is the guy to go to if you're having any kind of doubts. And as a matter of fact, today we'll be helping you blow through those doubts with tips, tricks, and resources to get more interviews. So we're going to be exploring today how to move from getting that resume in to getting that interview. So Kyle, I'm going to start off with the first question. What are some of the common reasons your clients or candidates in general have given for not following up after submitting a resume?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't follow up after submitting a resume because they just don't know how to. They're confused about what those next steps should look like and how they should follow up. Or they're worried about bothering the recruiter or the hiring manager. So I think the key is recognizing that if you're following up with someone and you do it in a polite way, it's short and to the point, that you're likely not bothering them and you're just checking in and making their job easier.
That's so true. What are some of the things you've heard or you've seen or maybe you've recommended that have really, worked in terms of method of communication? Has it been, follow up with an email, follow up with a phone call, maybe connect with them on LinkedIn? What would you say are some of the ways that, they cannot bother the recruiter, so to speak?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of recruiters talk about how they get cold calls or how people contact them in a method that's way different than how they've been communicating. So if all of your communication has been via email with your recruiter or hiring manager, I would keep doing that. If it's all been via phone call, I would stick to that way. However, I give the caveat that I love sending thank you cards and I love thanking people. So even if you do have a phone call, it's okay to follow up with a thank you email, a thank you card. But when you're checking in for updates, I would follow the recruiter's or hiring manager's lead and use whatever method they've been using to communicate with you instead of just switching it up on them and them being surprised.
That's true. I mean, sitting in the hiring manager's chair sometimes, what I've seen is that you want to follow my method of communication. I agree with that. Because, for example, if I'm following up via a phone call, chances are this is something I want to get done quickly. So a phone call is how I want you to communicate with me. But if I'm, a little bit more, I'm going to say laid back, or maybe it's something that I've got more people involved with and I need more input, and I send you an email, as a hiring manager, I really want you to kind of follow that flow with me. Following up with a phone call, sometimes I don't have all the information right there. I don't have a decision yet. I don't want to tell you yes or no. I'm kind of caught off guard. So I do agree with you. And that thank you card is also really cool. I know a lot of people, I think, don't use the mail as much anymore. It could just be the technological generation. It's all about the email and the digital presence. But have you ever seen any other methods that you found really stood out or really made the applicant, leave an impression from your perspective?
Yeah, I think something that's helpful is providing really clear and helpful work samples and bringing those to the interview and not coming to the interview just ready to share that work sample, but just having some ready for them and being able to show them visually. So I could say, okay, I've done really cool marketing campaigns, but then if you're asking me, okay, tell me, Kyle, about a time you created a marketing campaign that was outside the box. I can go into my messenger bag and be like, oh, here's a newsletter I created, and hand it to them and leave it with them. So I think having some tangible work samples is really helpful. but not just immediately throwing it at them, but having it be part of the conversation and having it be natural.
So they've sent off I'm going to paint a little bit of a picture here. So I've posted a role, a candidate sent off a resume. Now they're trying to touch base to see what's going on with the job search, right? What are some of the tips that you would recommend? Because I've seen a lot of candidates, even on LinkedIn, and even people who I've coached, they'll say, well, I've sent off the resume. I don't really know should I follow up? Should I call? Should I pass by the office and just pop in? What are some of the things that you would recommend that they do while I'm going to say they're kind of antsy, waiting for this first interview to arrive?
Yeah, I think the first step is for them to take a few breaths and realize that the hiring process takes time and companies receive a lot of applications. And for you, your job search is a priority. You're like, I need this job. But for the recruiter or hiring manager, they could be hiring for a few dozen or a few hundred people.
That's right.
That job is not their number one priority all the time. Or if they're a hiring manager, this is just a job they need to fill, and they may be backfilling that position in their own time. So recognizing it may take some time, and that just because you haven't heard back in a week or two doesn't mean you're not being considered.
That's
right. It could just be they're busy or someone's on vacation. The second thing is, I think it's okay to follow up with a recruiter or a hiring manager, but always check the instructions on the job posting and what they say. A lot of job postings will say, please don't call us, or please don't follow up at least for 2 weeks. Or if you have questions, contact info@google.com or whatever it is.
Right.
So following those instructions, and a lot of people get dismissed in the process because they don't follow basic instructions that are outlined in the job posting. But when in doubt, I don't think it hurts to follow up, as long as you do it in a simple way that isn't aggressive or isn't seven paragraphs long. That's a bunch of information that they don't need. I would solely focus on following up and saying, hey, I just wanted to check in and see if there's anything else you need from me. I'm still interested in this position.
I definitely agree with those suggestions, Kyle. And I think the one that you probably left out is invite somebody for a coffee, because I know that's your go-to, right? I was really waiting for ask us for a coffee. But for our listeners, definitely, I know you'll dive into that a little bit later. But on the hiring manager's side, I like the point that you made there where, give us time. So, for example, I saw somebody on LinkedIn the other day post that, why would a recruiter post multiple times? Or why would they take so long to get back to you? And people forget that's not the only job we're recruiting for. There is likely that if the person's a dedicated recruiter, chances are they've got probably 10 to 15, probably more roles on the go, some critical, some high priority, some kind of more when you find the right person, let me know. So, and then on the hiring manager side, it's probably even worse, because now you're in a company with different liaison point, different touch points, different liaisons. So like you said, they could be on vacation. It could be a situation where maybe we're reevaluating based on what's come through the talent pool. Is this the right role? Are we really getting the right skill sets? So I think candidates need to understand that the recruitment process is a two-way street. So you're trying to demonstrate what you do, but we are also trying to evaluate if what you are bringing to the table is what we're really looking for. I mean, I've had scenarios where I've posted a job or a couple of roles, and I've posted it probably one or two different ways. And just the type of applicants that come through, I go, probably I worded that incorrectly. Or, am I getting the right types of people? So I think candidates need to understand that we're trying to evaluate them, and they should give us enough time to do our due diligence to evaluate what they've sent to us before they start that follow-up process. And I agree with you, sometimes the job posting will say, give us a week, give us 2 weeks, we'll follow up, within 15 days, whatever the case may be, or we'll follow up by email. And I don't know if it's the anxiousness of the candidate, or maybe they just can't wait to get to the interview stage, but they forget that, here are some instructions, here are some guidelines of when to expect the next communication. And I think it really helps if you follow that, because now I feel comfortable knowing that you not only are interested, but you also respect my time and my effort and my instructions that I've put in front of you. So what I wanted to segue into, Kyle, is these days, I mean, with LinkedIn, with social recruiting, with networking becoming one of the more predominant ways to connect and job search, do we even need to send out a resume anymore to really get to that interview point?
I think it depends on people's job search methods, but I've found that oftentimes if people are networking effectively, if they're reaching out to people and connecting, the resume is often just a formality. They're going to be referred to a position, a friend's going to recommend them, and then at some point they have to submit their resume as a formality. Usually at the beginning is helpful, so that when you reach out to someone, they don't say, well, did you submit your resume? And you're like, oh, no, I didn't. It's always great to submit your resume first, I find. But oftentimes it's often just a formality. As long as everything aligns up on it and sounds right, it's a formality, and the networking is really what happens. Over 80%, 85% of jobs are by way of networking. So I encourage people to spend their time and effort there, finding the right jobs, customizing the resume a bit for it, but really networking and meeting people and learning about these companies and getting it in, because 1,000 or 2,000 people could apply for the job. And even with the best resume, if yours doesn't get hand plucked, it probably won't get seen.
I definitely agree with you, Kyle. And I mean, seeing how recruiting has really taken on a more social, I'm going to say, approach, I think it's very important for people to realize that the resume is really only a part of the process. It's not the deal breaker or the, deal maker. It's really just a part of the process. And you're right. A lot of these people don't understand that, there are thousands of jobs on job boards, but 90% of jobs are still in the hidden job market, which means for every 1,000 jobs you see, there are probably 9,000 other ones that you don't see out there, right? And like you said, to tap into that, it really goes beyond the resume. I can't tell you how many clients I've had that, they go, Aldeen, I really need a great resume. I really need some ideas, some pointers. Look at my resume for me. Tell me what you think. And I go, what else are you bringing to the table apart from the resume? Are you networking? How's your presence on LinkedIn? Have you, even reached out and followed the companies that you have been applying to? What else are you doing to, like you said, separate yourself from the noise of, thousands of applicants coming through? So definitely important, I think, that they differentiate themselves. But Kyle, I know you've got some really cool ideas. I know you've mentioned a couple on LinkedIn, but for our listeners who are not on LinkedIn, who I will recommend get on LinkedIn before the end of this show, what are some of the things that you've seen really pop out outside of just the resume? So at the networking events, what are some of the tips that you would have to really, get beyond that point so you're getting to, that interview invitation?
Yeah. And I tend to repeat this when I do articles or interviews, but I do this because it works. If you want a position at a company, find someone in that position and have a phone call or coffee with them. So if I want to be a software engineer at Facebook, find a software engineer at Facebook or 5 of them and say, hey, let's grab coffee or chat. And then they can walk you through how they got the jobs step by step. And people are often willing to do that if you send a really quick message and it has a clear call to action. And then that software engineer can introduce you to the hiring manager.
Exactly.
But the key is to take a step back and always focus on relationship building, not reaching out just, oh, I want a job. But reach out, hey, I want to learn from you and learn about your career, how you started working here, what you like about it, if there's anything you don't like, and leveraging that and all the connections on LinkedIn. And a lot of people kind of come to me and say, well, I tried that, Kyle, and it doesn't work. What happens is they've only messaged like 3 people.
True. Or one.
Or one. Or one. Or they send an essay to people, and I'm like, no, just stick to a few sentences, a clear call to action. And sure, people aren't going to respond, but people will. If you send no messages, you'll get no responses. But if you send 100 messages, you'll get some responses, I promise.
Yeah, at least one.
Yeah, at least one. Hopefully a lot more. And I've noticed personally I get a lot more. And I've reached out to people who were big, and I didn't think they would respond, but they did.
Yes. And I recently read one of your posts where you reached out to one of your LinkedIn, I'm going to say idols, and they responded to you. And I think that's a really great message, especially to, I did the same thing actually. So I remember one of the podcasts that I follow, HR leaders. And I believe, if you want additional HR support in addition to this radio station and podcast, I think you should definitely take a listen to that as well. And one of the things I did, I said, wow, when I really started or decided to start a podcast, I said, I'm going to reach out to 5 or 6 podcast hosts. I'm going to hear how they got started, how they overcame some of the issues and problems with starting a podcast, and even some of the fears of starting a podcast. And that's exactly what I did. I got on LinkedIn. I found a couple of podcast hosts. I found ones that were probably closely aligned to what I would want to do. And I reached out. And like you said, if you send out enough and you keep it, like you said, clean, simple, with a call to action, people will respond. And people are really a lot more human than people think. They think, oh, they're not going to respond to me. They're not going to accept my request. I always say, try. If you send out 100 and nothing comes back, then okay, you've tried it. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe you need to readjust the message, but try it. Get out of your comfort zone and do something different, because like you said, there are lots of applicants out there. What makes you different from that other person? Why would I want to invite you in for an interview if you look just like everybody else?
Exactly. And I think you have to try and put yourself out there. And that's I found that people often sabotage themselves during the job search. They'll try like 70 or 80% of the way, but then they don't do everything in their power to navigate the job search and land an interview. And I think sometimes they're afraid of actually hearing back from that person. Like, what if I reach out to this VP or this CMO and they get back to me and then I have a phone call? And I think sometimes people don't try things, or they sabotage it because they're afraid that it may actually work. And they're setting themselves up for failure at times.
That's so true. And I think I always say to my clients, what's the worst thing that could happen? They don't respond or they say no. And how would that make you feel? Would it make you feel any less worthy, or any would it make you feel less of yourself? Probably not. You go, okay, so they probably didn't have the time. Some of these people I've noticed, they're not the ones in control of their LinkedIn pages. So believe it or not, job seekers, some of the top players in the industry, their LinkedIn pages are not being managed by them. It's actually being managed by their virtual assistant or their executive assistant. So sometimes you reach out and they don't respond to you, or they don't get back to you in a timely manner. Sometimes it's really not just them. And that's why I always recommend you've got to apply or infuse more steps in your job search strategy. Just sending the resume alone only gets you this far. You have to infuse other things into the job search to get you that interview, get you in front of that hiring manager. So I know you've talked a lot, Kyle, about some of the, I'm going to say, strange guerrilla tactics that other candidates have employed to get them seen or get them into the interview. What are some of them that you've seen, actually? Can you think of maybe 2 or 3 that you went, whoa, that really worked?
Yeah, something I've seen that's helpful is people mailing their resume. My initial thought when my client suggested this was, why would you mail your resume? There's an online application. But they were like, oh, let me mail the resume and let me add some pictures from a recent trip I took because the person likes travel. Or let me customize it, the package I send, based on the position and the company and what this recruiter is looking for. So I've seen that be successful, because going back to the thank you cards, a lot of people don't get snail mail anymore. So I've seen that be super successful for people. And be something that works. Something else that's been helpful for people, I don't see this happen a lot, but I think with stopping by offices can be helpful too. So it depends on the company. So someone stopping by Google may not get a response, but they may get a response stopping by and saying, hey, I want to speak to this person or this person. You may not be able to speak with them, but then they're leaving a message saying, hey, Kyle Elliott stopped by to talk to you.
Right. And that name now stands
name is
out.
on their radar.
That's right. One of the things I've actually seen, I've seen where a candidate sent, I'm going to say flowers or something like that. And I'm going, I don't know if I would recommend that, but for some people it may work. For me, I don't think I would appreciate that, but they've actually sent, I'm going to say, small gifts to the hiring manager or the recruiter that is in line with what they like. So like you said, For example, if they liked a particular thing, maybe travel, they sent them, I'm not going to say a travel voucher. Obviously, that would be a little bit over the top. But, they would send out something, maybe a catalog of here's some pictures I took while traveling that may be related to the role. And in my mind, I'm going, depending on how you approach that or how you apply that, that may work. But you also want to be very cognizant of who the person is that you're sending it to. So,
yeah, and I think there's a fine line between being assertive and being aggressive. And I think sometimes you can break the rules and be assertive, and then other times you can break the rules and people are uncomfortable because it's aggressive.
True. That is very true. Now, we've talked a lot about what we would recommend, but what are some of the bad things that you've seen happen in this period between when they've sent out their resume till they hear back or get into the interview that you go, no, candidates, we want to avoid this? What would you share with our listeners of some of the bad experiences you've had or seen?
I think a big thing is kind of going back to the initial anxiety is that people do excessive follow-up. So they'll come to me and say, hey, Kyle, I had an interview on Friday. It's now Tuesday and I haven't heard back. And I was like, well, did you expect to hear back that quick? What was the timeline they gave you? So I always think it's important for candidates when they submit a resume or anything like that to look if there's a timeline, and if there's not, recognize, like we said before, that it'll take time. So a lot of people kind of want to just jump the gun and follow up a bunch, and it's okay to follow up after a week or two, but you don't want to follow up too many times or be too aggressive. So I think that like overly aggressive follow up is something that I've seen as a no-no. And then I've also seen a lot of people with their social media presence, I think less of Facebook now, but a lot of bashing on LinkedIn, people just commenting negatively about recruiters or employers or anything.
Right.
And the first thing I do when I get resumes is I look someone up on LinkedIn and I'm like, okay, let's see who they are, not just their profile, but I want to look at their activity feed. Are they a positive person?
Right.
Are they a negative person? And a lot of people are pretty negative on LinkedIn. I mean, most people are positive, but there's people that go on rants. And it's like, do I want to employ someone who's going on a rant all the time on LinkedIn or who doesn't have that filter that may be necessary in the environment I'm hiring them for? So I think that's a huge kind of red flag for me when people are just kind of nonstop bashing or complaining online. I
agree. And I know even as a hiring manager, sitting in that seat, one of the first things I do when I see a resume come through that I think I'd want to follow through on, the first thing I do is Google the person. So not just LinkedIn, but I Google. I want to see what their internet presence is like, right? Do they have YouTube videos? Do they have a Facebook page? Do they have a Twitter feed? Like you said, who am I really looking at, right? There's a debate out there as to whether you should do that as a recruiter or not. And I really think it's important for you to look at the full person that you bring, the full profile, not just what's on paper, because that really helps me to evaluate how you're going to fit into a culture, into our organization. Then the second step I do, I go into LinkedIn and I look, do they even have a LinkedIn profile? You'd be surprised how many people don't have a LinkedIn profile. And in my opinion, again, I don't really want to say you must have a LinkedIn or you must have this profile, but LinkedIn provides such a great platform for you to share a lot of what you can't see on your resume. We're going to get into that in our other segment with some myths and truths there. But a lot of people, they try to cram everything on this resume. They want to tell you the entire life story. But for others who are a little bit more tactical and strategic, they'll tell you a little bit about what applies to the role. But on LinkedIn, if you have a presence, now you can share a lot more and I call it your extended resume of what you're bringing to the table. So things like a link to a website if you have one, a link to maybe a recent article that you probably wrote, or maybe a portfolio that you've developed, or maybe just this cool spreadsheet that you developed, to do some analysis and procurement, and you wanted to share with your potential employer that you have all these skills, or maybe it's just a Google document, that really highlights some of your achievements, maybe has some letters of recommendation, but whatever it is, I always look at that internet presence. And I agree with you, social bashing, anything that's negative. I know things are out there, but you got to remember at the end of the day, it's not just the resume that gets seen. If you get to the point where you get seen, it's a lot more than just the resume. It's your professional presence that we will be evaluating and personality. So if you're participating in negative, like you said, bashing on social media, especially if you're speaking bad of your current employer or previous employer. You know, for me as a recruiter or hiring manager, that is a red flag for me. You know, I'm going, this is how this person would potentially act if they had a falling out in my company. Is that something I really want to do? So I agree with you, definitely. One of the things that I've seen people do really badly as well is that they just fall off the map. They don't connect. So the opposite of always connecting is no connection, right?
Yeah.
And I found, so I had a scenario just happen recently where I reached out to, I had a resume come in. I reached out to person the first time. I got no response. Now I'm thinking if there's an email on your resume, if there's a phone number on your resume, these are the top methods that you want me to use to reach out to you, right? So obviously my go-to is an email first. That's my go-to, right? So I email you first, no response. So I have a 3-point rule really. So I email first. If I get no response within 24 hours, then I'll email again. And the only reason I'm emailing again is if this person really is at the top of my pile, right? He's in my top 10 list or my shortlisted, right? And then I will email a third time just in case. I've had one scenario where somebody I emailed a week later, they came back and said, listen, I was on vacation. I had limited access to internet. I saw your email. I'm really sorry. Is the role still open? Now that I can appreciate because now I understand the silence. But then when I go to, email 2 and email 3 and nothing comes back, for me, I go, wow, I will remember this name because the next time I post a role that's similar, or maybe if a colleague of mine comes over and says, hey, I really shortlisted this person. What do you think? I go, never really left a good impression for me.
Yeah.
So not really what I would like to see. The other thing that I find is really bad on the candidate side as well is when the communication is not professional. So I have sent out interview invitations to candidates and the response back is way less than professional. I mean, it's just short of, I would say, disrespect or, not respecting the time of the recruiter and the hiring manager and the other people who have made the effort to put this out for you. So for me, I think if you're going to communicate, always revert to professional communication, regardless of how social and how upbeat or how casual the conversation may come across. Always default to the professional is my recommendation.
Yeah, and I think those basics are things people really forget. Like make sure your email and phone number are even on your resume.
Exactly.
Make sure you answer or have a voicemail set up and return it in a timely manner. Because all of those little things add up to a big thing can be a huge red flag. Like if there's one little red flag, I can overlook it. But there's a number of red flags I start being bothered or worried about. Okay, you have all these skills and experiences. Well, why are all these red flags coming up? Right.
That's right. And I think it also speaks to your personal brand too, because before you get to that interview stage, all these impressions that you're making are usually, you can't justify them sometimes. So for example, if your email doesn't work or it's bouncing back, or maybe you mistyped it on the resume, or if your phone number, there's no voicemail stuff. I remember calling a couple of candidates and there's no voicemail. Like there's not even an opportunity to leave a voicemail. And I go, you're obviously not job searching, because how will I then let you know that I've called, right? So all these little things are really creating an impression for you as a candidate before you even meet me, in the interview room. And all of this is either making you appear really, really appealing or really, really unappealing as a candidate. So I want to jump a little bit to rounds of interviews, Kyle. So we're going to say, we've moved past, we've gotten the first interview. Some people get really nervous when they hear about multiple rounds of interview. What would you suggest is probably one of the top ways to stay engaged while you're waiting, let's say, for a second or a third interview?
Yeah, I think between the first and second or second and third interview is asking for that timeline at the end of the previous interview. So you have it in mind and can follow up after. So if they say, okay, it's going to be 2 weeks, then at 2.5 weeks to follow up. And people often forget when they say, okay, what questions do you have for us? One, they don't always ask the best questions. And two, a key question to always ask is what's the timeline or when can I expect to hear back next? So then you can follow up appropriately. So I think that's really helpful and important. And then also recognizing if you don't hear back during the timeline, it may not be you. It could be that a candidate canceled and they had to reschedule. It could be that someone got sick and they had to reschedule. It could be that the person's position who you're filling something came up. There could be a ton of different reasons. Right. But I think asking for a timeline is so important.
I agree. And what I think a lot of candidates forget is that the higher up you go in the interview process and the more people you have involved in the interview process is the longer it is potentially going to take. So if you are applying for a C-level role or a director level role, chances are there are probably going to be several rounds of interviews and several people involved in the interview process. So if you're not hearing back, within 2 weeks or even 3 weeks sometimes, I've even had a candidate say the last time I interviewed at this level, it took me 6 months to hear back. For me as a recruiter personally, I think that's a bit long. But again, I don't know what's involved in that process. So I think as a candidate, you also need to appreciate that while you're anxious to get in and you're ready to, show us what you can do, you also have to remember that there are a lot of other things behind the scenes going on to get you moving, right? And get you going. One of the things I've also recommended that candidates do while they're waiting, especially between interviews, is engage with the company on social media. So if the company's on LinkedIn, maybe you'll like the post that they've done, maybe like you said, you'll connect with somebody who's in the company. I think keep yourself relevant and not get too anxious. So add some elements of you being visible for them while you're in there, demonstrating that you're engaged, but also remember that they may have a lot of other things going on too.
Yeah, I love that idea of social media because I think that goes to the communicating assertively but not aggressively.
That's
You're
right.
Just kind of pinging them and saying, okay, I'm on your radar.
That's
You're not
right.
being aggressive and contacting them directly. You're just a like or a comment or a share.
Exactly. To me, that is almost like your passive aggressive, just like you said. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So this is HR and Career with AldeenST. We'll be right back after this short break.
Boost your job search with a masterclass. Learn how to optimize your efforts, use multiple strategies, and get hired faster through our Job Seeker Masterclasses. Learn how to craft an outstanding resume, network yourself into a job, and interview like a pro. Join a class today at AldeenST.com. Optimize your job search and get hired faster.
See the difference an HR business partner can make in your business. Let us show you how a strong, strategic, and aligned human resource strategy can help you reduce costs, improve productivity, and help you retain your competitive advantage. Make your human resources strategy part of your business strategy to drive real business results. Let us show you how at AldeenST.com or at AldeenST@gmail.com. Aldeen Simmonds Thorpe Consulting, transforming your business with the power of people.
Welcome back to HR and Career. I'm your host, AldeenST. We are joined by Kyle Elliott, a career coach champion and caffeinated, of course. I can't leave that part out. And today we're talking about how do you get from resume to interview? Some of the tips, tricks, and resources you can use to get more interviews. So this segment of the show, we call it Truth or Myth. So today we're gonna do a little bit of an interplay. So my first truth or myth, Kyle. So one-page resumes get more views and more interviews. Truth or myth?
I would say that's a myth. I think your resume really needs to be however short as or long as needed to show you're the perfect fit for the company and position. So I've done 2 or 3 page resumes for recent college grads, and I've done 1-page resumes for executives with 25 years of experience. So I think the page limit is less important than the quality of the information and showing that you're the perfect fit.
I definitely agree with you there. I definitely think it's a myth. Like you said, it's whatever gets your message across. If you need 2 pages to demonstrate you're the right fit, make it 2. If you need 10, probably we need to shorten that down.
Yes.
But definitely, use the real estate you need to prove that you are the right candidate. Awesome. Do you want to challenge me? Truth or myth?
Sure. I'm curious if you think, what you think as a recruiter about people needing to stay in a job for a year, and whether it's a truth or myth that people are going to be seen as a flight risk if they've been somewhere for less than a year.
Well, for me, I think that's a little bit of a truth, and here's why. For some roles, I find a little bit of tenure says a lot about you. So, for example, as a director level or a manager level, if I see a manager and it's not a contract role, and they're in that job or they're in jobs consistently, they're only a year and a half, just a year. For me personally, as a recruiter, I start to wonder what kind of an impact they would make to the company within a year. However, if it's more of an entry-level role or I'm going to say maybe you're moving from one industry to the next, I would probably say you probably experimented a little bit. You're probably trying to find what works for you. So for me, again, it depends on the level, and then it really depends on if it's the same industry or, if it's really related what you've been moving to. What do you think, Kyle?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it definitely depends on the level people are in their career and how many times they've done that. So if I see a bunch of 3-month positions and they're not contract positions or temporary positions, I'd be worried. And I think oftentimes people do have a bunch of contract positions or positions that they knew were going to be temporary.
Right.
But they state that on their resume. So I think it's really important if you do have a contract position to state that on your resume and say, okay, this was a contract position and that's why I was short. Or if you left somewhere only after a few months, give an explanation on your resume. Like, hey, I was recruited to this other company and couldn't turn it down. I personally love addressing red flags on resumes so that people don't go wandering in their mind, oh my God, you got fired or whatever. I like addressing them on the resume so right away people know what happened and why.
That's true. I definitely agree with that. So I got another one for you. Truth or myth? My expertly crafted resume should do all the work for me.
No. I have had clients. I had a client who applied to a company 10 times and didn't hear back.
Wow.
I rewrote his resume and he heard back the next day and got an interview.
Nice.
Just from a different resume. It was the same person, but his resume was keyword optimized, had better accomplishments and all that. So a resume plays a part, and some people get jobs or at least interviews as a result of just having a good resume. But your resume oftentimes is a very small slice of the whole job search pie.
That's
so
right.
A good resume may help you, and oftentimes it'll help you say, oh wow, I did all these things and I can use it during my interview to talk about it. But it's only one small slice of the pie.
Perfect. I definitely agree with you there. I wrote an article on my blog, and I shared a little bit about why you need a job search strategy. I find a lot of candidates and even my own clients, they think, I just need to get a better looking resume. I'll definitely get the interview now. But we talked, in our previous segment of how the job market has really changed. And now you're one of many, in that job search. So just because you've got a resume, a great resume, there's so many other pieces that you need to keep you visible and in the mind of the recruiter. So I definitely think that's a myth. No matter how expertly crafted your resume may be, I mean, that one-off scenario, I'm sure that probably happens less likely than, than the norm. So definitely you need to employ more pieces in your job search strategy to really be successful.
Absolutely. I agree.
Awesome. So truth or myth again. Recruiters and hiring managers are busy, and if I'm a pest, I won't get an interview.
I think there's a fine line. I think following up, so I think it's true if you're a pest. And if you follow up too many times, I think you can annoy people and they worry about that social aspect. However, I think it's mostly a myth because most people don't follow up a million times. They do under follow up. They don't send a thank you email. They don't check in, and they never touch base for an update. I've seen a number of recruiters post on LinkedIn like, hey, you're not bothering me when you check in real quick. As long as you do it tactfully, it's quick and to the point. So I think oftentimes as long as you do it right, it's not a big deal, and it could actually be helpful to get an update for you and know where you stand in the process.
I agree. And I mean, we recently covered that topic where, you know, you want to make sure that you follow the lead of the recruiter. If the follow-up is by email, you do it by email. If they can communicate with you by phone, you follow up by phone. But I definitely agree with you. So few candidates really do any kind of a follow-up. I can probably tell you there are only a few that I've ever come across that have taken the time, even after the interview, to craft a thank you email. You know, I've even had people who have, after the phone interview, they've crafted a thank you email. And I go, now that gives me something to remember you by. You know, now I can actually connect with you differently because now I have another touch point for you. So I definitely think that that's a myth. And like you said, there's a definite fine line when it comes to following up. You want to make sure that you're not too much, but you definitely want to provide some kind of follow-up. All right, you got more for me, Kyle?
Yeah, I'm curious your opinion about whether cover letters matter. So a lot of people say cover letters don't matter. Do you think that's true or do you think that's a myth?
So again, I'm going to go, for me, if I should just look at how I've recruited probably a lot of the roles over the last year or two, they have not mattered for me. And I'm going to tell you why. So in the industries that I've worked in, you have high turnover. You have, I'm going to say, a mix between, I'm going to say high-level roles and lower, more entry-level, mid-level career roles. So for me, a cover letter, especially when I've got a ton of applicants, unless it catches me in the first 3 to 5 seconds, chances are I'm not going to read it. I'm going to be very honest with you, right? If after I've scanned it for the first paragraph and there's nothing in there, I move on. And I've noticed too, not a lot of applicants even send cover letters anymore. So on one side, I'm going, whew, now I just focus on the resume. But for those who do send it, I would recommend you got to make it attractive, that I want to read the cover letter before I go to the resume. I know not all companies have an ATS. That's a whole different other discussion. But not a lot of companies, some of the companies don't have an ATS. And it is a physical person that is looking at every single resume. Mm-hmm. We've had hundreds, thousands of resumes come through under one role, and I have to go through every single one manually. Now, after I've hit like resume 120, 125 and going, they just start to blur, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got to have something that make the recruiter or the hiring manager go, oh, whoa, I got to read this again. Wow, okay, I really want to see what else they do or what else they can offer me. I want to get to the resume now. I want to see what else is there. So I think, I would say cover letter for me is a myth. You don't need a cover letter, but I'd also say you need to follow the instructions in the job posting.
Yes.
If the job posting says send a cover letter and a resume, follow the posting. If the posting says submit your resumes too, I would say you could take the chance, unless you've got one of those really grabbing cover letters, you could take the risk of just sending the resume in. So I'd say defer to the preferred, or the preference of the recruiter or the company, and then go with that.
That makes total sense, and I agree with that.
Perfect. So, I mean, we've definitely touched on resumes. I want to dive a little bit, just one more truth or myth, in terms of resumes. Now, for me, I know you're going to throw this back at me, but truth or myth for you, your candidates have said that recruiters only spend an average, I'm going to say 6 seconds on a resume. Mm-hmm. So truth or myth?
For the first glance, I found that to be true. Personally, when I've been in positions where I'm hiring people, where the other staff are hiring people, they look at it real quick and they're looking for keywords. And during that first pass through, oftentimes people have a few hundred or a few thousand resumes. So they're doing a 6-second glance, not to see that you're a good fit, but to throw people out really quick. So I think on the first glance, they do only spend a handful of seconds. And then after that first glance, they may get more picky, but people tend not to read word for word unless you're down to the final 10 or 20. At least that's what I've found.
That's really true. And I mean, I know I threw that at you because I'm pretty sure you've seen, you know, having written so many resumes, you've definitely seen some and you probably try the 6-second test on them. But yes. I know for me, I definitely apply that. Not quite 6 seconds, but for me, it's a quick scan. And especially, different companies I've worked for, you know, use, ATSs, but the one I'm with right now, they don't use an ATS. Right? So it's very, hands-on. It's, you gotta read every resume. And for me, like I said, once you hit a certain threshold, you're really eliminating, right? If it doesn't jump out at you, you're out of the pile, pretty much. So you want to make sure that you pass that glance. I'm going to call it a glance. You pass the glance test because different recruiters will have different thresholds. So you want to make sure that your resume passes the glance test. And especially your information is accurate too. So when you pass the test and they reach out, they get through to you.
Yeah, and I think your resume has to pass that glance test. It also has to be good enough if they sit there and read the whole thing, and it has to be ATS friendly. So people often only focus on like one part. Okay, I want it to be ATS friendly, or I want the top to be good for the 6-second glance. We have to have all three. It has to be good if they read the whole thing. It has to be good if someone does a glance, and it has to be ATS friendly. So you have to have all of those. And that's why people often come to me is because there's just so much that goes into writing a resume that people get overwhelmed with all the different factors they have to consider.
That's true. And I remember in our first episode when my mom was on, she said one of the greatest investments you can make is in a career coach. And it may sound a little bit weird coming from career coaches as we're talking about this for candidates, but you really need to understand that if you don't take your career seriously, or if you don't understand what you need to take your career to the next level, you're probably never going to, right? You don't know what you don't know. So I think it's really a good idea to get a second opinion if you have a question. And I mean, I know you offer a great 5-day course of getting yourself ready for your job search, getting prepared. And I also offer master classes on interviewing and getting ready for your job search. But, you know, those are free resources that you can use to help determine how ready you are in your career and really, you know, break apart those truths and myths out there and get yourself more interviews, right? So I think candidates need to realize that, you know, it's not just we want to be out there, but we want to help you. We want to make sure you move on to the job that you really want. And we want to definitely help you optimize your way there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think those are all key points.
Perfect. Well, we're going to take our last break. We'll be right back.
Boost your job search with a masterclass. Learn how to optimize your efforts, use multiple strategies, and get hired faster through our Job Seeker Masterclasses. Learn how to craft an outstanding resume, network yourself into a job, and interview like a pro. Join a class today at AldeenST.com. Optimize your job search and get hired faster.
See the difference an HR business partner can make in your business. Let us show you how a strong, strategic, and aligned human resource strategy can help you reduce costs, improve productivity, and help you retain your competitive advantage. Make your human resources strategy part of your business strategy to drive real business results. Let us show you how at AldeenST.com or at AldeenST@gmail.com. Aldeen Simmonds Thorpe Consulting, transforming your business with the power of people.
Welcome back to HR and Career. I'm your host, AldeenST. In our last segment, I'm going to ask Kyle, who's joining us today, to share some of his best advice. Today, we've been talking about how to get more interviews after you've submitted your resume. We've kind of loaded down on tips, tricks, resources that you can use to really get more interviews. So Kyle, what's the best piece of advice you've either received or given to a client waiting between resumes submitted and getting into that interview?
It's so simple, but it's the thank you card, and so few people do it. And I tell my clients this over and over. They'll invest, some of them, a few $1,000s in a coaching package with me, and then they don't send thank you cards, or they don't send a thank you email. They're like, oh, I didn't get around to it. And it's like, wait, you spent 20 hours preparing for this interview, going to the interview, all of this, going through 4 or 5 rounds, and then you didn't have 5 minutes to send a thank you card. And almost every single time I send a card to someone, I'm not interviewing now, but when I send cards to clients or a friend or someone on LinkedIn who did something, almost every single person sends me a message or a text or email saying, oh my God, you made my day. So I think that is one of the key things people can do to touch base, is because it's a really passive way to be on their mind. You're not disturbing their workflow. You're not calling them or feel like you're bothering them. It's a separate touch point where 2 or 3 days after the interview, they're going to be reminded of you in a positive way. And also, if you forgot to say something during the interview, that thank you card is a really great opportunity to say, hey, I forgot to mention X, Y, and Z.
Perfect. I think that's a great point, Kyle. And I think the thank you is so underrated. I mean, I've seen recruiters, hiring managers, career coaches, just everybody involved in that process. And a lot of people say HR is a thankless job. You know, recruiting is a thankless job. Sometimes career coaching is a thankless job as well. And to your point, you know, once you put that effort out there to say, you know what, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your consideration. You know, thank you for, you know, taking the time to put this all together, because interviewing can be so much work. You know, putting this all together and really considering me fairly for this opportunity, I think that goes a far way, and it tells a lot about the person's character. That really is some really great advice there, Kyle. And I hope for everyone who is listening that the next time you get invited to an interview, you will remember to send at least a thank you email. And if you want to be awesome, you can take Kyle's advice and send a thank you note as well. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of HR and Career. I am your host, AldeenST. Join us again in our next episode as we dive deeper into all the facets of human resources and career development, providing practical and useful tips that you can use to move you forward. See you next time.